Good afternoon. I am Nury Turkel, Senior Fellow here at Hudson Institute. I'm pleased to welcome my good friend and a leader of the pro-democracy movement in China, Wu'er Kaixi, who is also known by his Uyghur name, Wu'er Wu'er Kaixi has fought against China's Communist Party's human rights abuses for most of his life. He began his lifetime of activism as a student leader of the Tiananmen Square pro-democracy movement in 1989, participating in a hunger strike, leading negotiations with officials, and ultimately making news when then Premier Li Peng rebuked him on a national television. He became China's second most wanted student activist and was forced to flee the country. Wu'er Kaixi settled in Taiwan and has been advocating around the world that Taiwan should be treated as a staunch democratic nation. He has been also working to promote human rights and democracy in China for those oppressed minority groups. He was recently appointed as the Secretary General of the Taiwan Parliamentary Human Rights Commission. Thank you, Wu'er Kaixi, for coming to Hudson to have a conversation with me on authoritarianism in China and how the international community should respond to Beijing's repression at home, aggression abroad, and why it took so long for the international community to wake up to the brutal regime in Beijing and the threat that the CCP is posing.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for this opportunity. And thanks to Hudson Institute. Yes, your question is an excellent question. Why did it take so long for the world to come around and realizing a simple fact that how evil a regime the Chinese Communist Party is? I remember 2 years ago, I was here in the United States, in the Capitol. I was in a hearing. That hearing was set the date on the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Massacre. I began that hearing by saying, I was here in the United States right after the massacre, right after the Chinese government sent in the military troops to suppress a peaceful demonstration in Beijing. And then I told some 40 members of the Congress in that hearing that day, I said, it took me no pleasure come back 30 years later and say, I told you so. I think the world have a tendency to say, okay, you guys are dissident. Of course you will criticize or maybe even using the more stronger emotional word to say, like, you will be bad-mouthing your government because you are dissident. And then, so they automatically think what we say, what we describe about our regime as an exaggeration. It's an unfortunate, that kind of mentality. So the world have failed to listen to what we have repeatedly said in the last 3 decades. More than that, I think the United States at that time made a crucial mistake of believing that engaging with China will bring China into democracy. I think at that time, the United States have led the Western world, Western democracy have made adopted a wrong China policy. I often describe that policy as appeasement. That policy is under 2 assumptions. The first assumption is, like I said, the economic engagement with China, cutting the slack for Chinese regime of massacring its own students, without adopting a universal value into China, thinking economic engagement will eventually nurture and give birth to a large Chinese middle classes, which will give birth to a civil society, which will then lead to democracy. This is the first assumption, and then we can call it naive. The second assumption is not at all so naive. The second assumption is that, okay, we will, by engaging with Chinese regime economically, nurture the regime of an authoritarian, totalitarian regime. By doing that, there will be consequences, but the consequences was assumed to be within Chinese border. Well, this assumption is not at all that naive. It's quite selfish. Unfortunately, the world witnessed what happened is both assumption were wrong. Naive or not, they were both wrong. China did not, from the economic growth, gave birth a civil society, let alone a democracy, rule of law, open society, open free media, free assembly. All these things we would expect to give birth to democracy did not take place in China. And then with the economic growth, Chinese regime become this direct threat to the world beyond its border. And that, of course, we know that has something to do with the technological advancement of internet and the world financial system, all these things. You can no longer confine a country within its own border. So the Chinese influence go beyond its border. They want to insert their value to our daily life. So both assumption that the China policy was frameworked right after Tiananmen went wrong. It was naive or not, it was wrong assumption. And for that, the world have put itself in a position to become more and more dependent in the Chinese market, Chinese economic drive force. So the world becoming dependent to an authoritarian regime who pay no attention to universal value. And when it has power, when it obtained the power, then it will do the eventual next thing that they want to take advantage of their position. And they did loot China. And then now they want to loot the world. I don't use that word lightly, but this is what we are today. In the 21st century, we're seeing a monstrous regime that not only suppress their own people, they have been denying any demand from the civil society for a dialogue of emerging civil society. They imprison lawyers who wants to fight for civil rights. When Hong Kong people took the street some 7 years ago, or even before that, after Tiananmen massacre, Hong Kong people took street almost every year. They wanted dialogue. The Chinese people denies that. Chinese regime denies that. And then when Dalai Lama and then when His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people demand a dialogue, Chinese regime denies that. When Uyghur people, let's say a very modest professor, Ilham Tohti, ask for Chinese government to have a dialogue in organizing a more civilized ruling of the Chinese Communist Party to the Uyghur people. Professor Ilham Tohti is so moderate. He is willing to accept the undeniable fact, but at least let's have a sit down and have a dialogue to talk about how we Uyghur people accepting the Chinese communist rule be in a more civil way. Right. Only that kind of a dialogue demand was denied by the Communist Party, and then the world and United States-led Western democracy were in the position to strike a dialogue because China also needs the world for its economic purposes. The world passed on that opportunity very, very unfortunately. Now, when the world say, no, you cannot do all these things you're doing to Hong Kong people, to Uyghur people, Chinese government says, we no longer need to listen to you. We no longer need to have the dialogue we never wanted in the first place. But we probably didn't have a chance to avoid earlier, but now we do. So the world is in a position, I think, finally realize what an evil regime we're dealing with, but a little too late.
Very insightful. So some observers, China observers, policymakers often say, we had an intention to change them, but instead of us changing them, they managed to change us. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, unfortunately, yes. That's a very sad assessment. We supposed to be the higher value holders, and then the world order was infrastructured by the United States after World War II. Like we're talking about United Nations, all these kind of world orders, liberal democracy with capitalism, was designed to prevent World War III. It did prevent the World War III, but it didn't in the last seven decades prevent regional war. It didn't prevent genocide. It didn't prevent human rights abuses. Why? Because we're so focusing on preventing war, the world order decided to respect the borderline. The byproduct of respecting the borderline is that you have to neglect, you have to give in to the central regime within those borderlines. And then so that lead to sovereign rights above human rights. That has to be changed.
At the hearing that you mentioned, I watched that important hearing in 2019. Not only that you tell American lawmakers that the United States failed the students in 1989, where they risked their lives, you also called out the business community for doing CCP's work, sidelining human rights in the US-China engagement, dialogue. And now we're seeing it again. They are lobbying against anti-Uyghur slavery bill in the United States Congress. What can you tell us about the business community's role doing the work of CCP, particularly in Western capitals here in the United States and in capitals of Europe?
Business community is a key and essential element of this world order, especially more and more today in this shrinking global village. Business community take a major role. And then, but let's also not forget that when the world shrinking, the world paying attention to ethic issues more and more. So the business community need to think again. And then it's no longer the 70s or 60s to say, it is my freedom to make a buck, make a profit. Pursuing profit itself is a merit. Well, not anymore. Today, when you are pursuing a profit, you cannot enable human rights abuses. That's a clearly, it should not need any explanation. And then I think this simple statement can be widely accepted. And then also, it will be bad for business. Come back if we know what you are selling, the product you are selling has blood on it. Right. Then the world is coming to that. One of the biggest difference from 21st century, I mean from today to let's say 30 years ago, is we learn much more from interaction on internet, on modern medias beyond borders. And then when we talk about them, we inserted basic human value in those. So as government or, it's like, the concept like civil society stay away from making my profit is no longer accepted. It could be a merit in 1960s or 50s, but not anymore. People do care about when they spend money, they do care about if they are on the right side of this universal value or not. So business community grow more conscious than your drive for profit. That's my suggestion. You have to stop enabling human rights abusers.
Follow up on that. Do you see any role by the governments, perhaps assisting the business community in their dealing with the Chinese government? As you know, the Western business entities have told the consumers around the world that they figured out how to do business in China. As the case of H&M, Nike,
yes.
We now know they have managed to cut off enough crossfire.
Yes.
Between, let's say, Washington and Beijing.
Yes.
So do you think that the governments should support business communities, encouraging them to do the right thing?
I think it's
adding additional legal tools, for example.
Probably. Before even that, before we go to the legal tools, I think the United States government and then the US-led Western democracy have to learn one thing: not to get in a debate with Chinese regime and their Chinese rhetorical.
Yeah.
For instance, the spokespersons of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of People's Republic of China, they often come and then they are quite boring, and then their statesmen are quite repetitive, and then they keep saying you cannot interfere with China's domestic issue. When they say that, the United States government say, we will. That's how you should answer. Because why we will? Because it's a universal value. It affects our life. Your domestic matters affects, when your domestic matters affects our life, we have a right to interfere. That is how United States should respond to the spokesperson's war wolf kind of, that's the word they describe for the spokesperson's mentality. Yes, wolf diplomacies, they're rhetorical, they're narratives. We should respond to them, we should stop their narratives. We should, by introducing new United States or Western democracies narratives. When they say, what you are doing hurts Chinese people's feeling. Let's be honest, when did Chinese regime ever care the feeling of Chinese people? But when they say what you're doing hurts Chinese people's feeling, when NBL player criticize about Chinese human rights situation, they boycott NBL's play in China. That hurts, and then they claim that hurts Chinese people's feeling. Well, the right response from the United States government should be, well, what you're doing hurts our feeling, hurts feeling of the United States. And then I want to remind the world on this one, Chinese people's feeling was never really in the agenda of Chinese regime, but United people, the feeling of the peoples of the United States affect next election, affect next China policy. And then that should how the United States government officials see this, and then standing in the right position.
Right. The one thing that the Chinese officials, the apologists around the world, missing something that you explain so eloquently. It's about value, American values. This is what Americans do when they see something wrong in that scale. They speak out. So that's exactly how Americans think. And there's a public demand to go hard on China, specifically on human rights. There's a recent polling shows more than 70% of the American public wants tougher China policy with respect to human rights. Speaking of wolf diplomacy, there's a new term, hostage diplomacy. I'd like to get you comments on the recent events involving Huawei's Meng Wanzhou and to Canadian Michaels. It seems that Beijing gets away with impunity for its behavior, taking hostage of Westerners in China. What is the potential fallout of China's hostage diplomacy to circumvent law and order?
You actually asked a very good question, and then better to be answered by a criminologist, because the term hostage, law and order, these, although it seems like we're talking about an international relation issue, but the principle of law and order, principle of criminal analogy does apply here. So if you you cannot let a hostage taker keep threatening to kill the hostage again and again to keep giving in. Any criminologist in this country or in the world will tell you the same. There is a way to deal with someone who takes hostages. Of course, when there is a hostage, you want to be careful, but then you should immediately learn these are criminals. They have no code of honor. They take hostage to get for their own benefits. And Chinese do that all the time, not just arresting foreign citizens in exchange of whoever they want to get back and whistle without crime. They also use their visas, their border controls as their hostages. Especially they take Chinese people as their hostages. For instance, right after 2016 election in Taiwan, the Democratic Progressive Party won that election. Madam Tsai Ing-wen became the president for Taiwan. The election took place January 2016. And she's to be inaugurated in May. There's about 4 months' time. So Chinese government immediately introduced a sanction to Taiwan to stop Chinese people, tourists going to Taiwan. And then before 2016, Taiwan has developed a big tourist industry to welcome Chinese tourists. So this sanction prohibiting Chinese tourists going to Taiwan hits Taiwan's economy. So they're using their own people as a hostage to imply their political ideology. What is their political ideology? According to Chinese regime, to say, okay, if President Tsai Ing-wen, do not go on a route to support Taiwan independence, that's what's going to get the punishment is going to be. But then let's think about it. Look at the picture clearly. The impunitive sanction applied right after the election, not after the inauguration, not at the time when President Tsai Ing-wen become President Tsai Ing-wen and then to announce her China policy. So basically, Chinese government is punishing Taiwanese voters for voting against Beijing's will. Taiwanese people immediately realized, so the government of Beijing can only take one position, even when it comes to Taiwan relation or Hong Kong, it's total submissive. So and then anything against that, they also they also control visas for foreign journalists to go into China to report on what was happening. Well, China is a big country. They also need foreign journalists to report on what's happening. But if that journalist does not report on the guideline of Chinese regime, then they won't get the visa. That's another example of hostage diplomacy. You and I, we both have our parents being blocked in China, prohibited from traveling. Right. And then also hundreds of thousands of Uyghur people. Right. That is also the Chinese government's hostage diplomacy. And then it's a typical behavior of a criminal group. So the world really needs to come and understand their China policy has to be based on, fighting off crimes. Right. So that's what exactly Chinese regimes are, a criminal group.
What kind of message that the Westerners doing business, traveling, residing in China should get from this episode?
Well, the first message, the idea I think they have already gotten is that the Western world is caving in to the Chinese regime. They're on their own. They want to do business. We have a Chinese saying and says it's a leak blood from the edge of a knife. Mm-hmm. It's a dangerous business to do business in China. I'm pretty sure that is the message they got in the last many decades, and then that is a desperate message they want to get out to the world. And then I hope the world gets it. And then it is the world's government's responsibility to stop that. The world should be in economic prosperity with these businessmen doing their businesses without worrying government interference. That has been the world order in the West, in the free world, and then the government should protect that when it comes to China by dealing with Chinese government and make sure that happens. Not just bringing China into WTO. You have to also ask the Chinese regime to obey the rule of WTO.
Right. Let's talk about the Uyghur genocide. The Uyghur issue is not just an isolated issue, as you know. It reflects the fundamental essence of the CCP's character, which demands total submission, as you have been telling the world for so many years. I have two questions. Why do you think that CCP has decided to choose the acts of genocide to advance its political objectives? And two, and the world is watching, and the world is watch. And then, do you think that the Chinese leadership miscalculated the costs imposed by the U.S.-led Western democracies in policy, legislative front, as significant as calling it genocide. Do you think that they got off guard or miscalculated that level of response from the West?
Did they really miscalculate? I mean, the world genocide Uyghur genocide situation took the world by shock. But did it really change? Until today, we're still watching. We don't know. I mean, Chinese government thinks they can get away with anything. That's when they decided to implement this Uyghur policy. And then it's not about race. It's not about ethnicity. It's not about religion. And a lot of people think that's because of the religion differences that Chinese are attacking Muslim. Well, no. And then also not about we are different races, we are different languages, cultures, background, history. It's just because Uyghur people are not giving in. And then you just said, I have been keep repeating that sentences. Let me do it again. The Chinese regime can only take one kind of relation when come before them, that is total submission. So when 10 million Uyghur people under People's Republic of China did not give in, did not totally submit to the Communist Party, that's what they came out to. So, and then did they miscalculate? Yeah, the world, they probably didn't realize they can got so much attention. Well, in the 21st century, you put 1 million, more than 1 million people in internment camp. Of course you get attention. But did Chinese Communist regime really miscalculated when they think we can probably get away with it? The attention they didn't calculate it, but the response. You know what? I am not 100% positive to say they miscalculated because the world has coming around a little, but a little too slow. I don't know how long our fellow Uyghur people can survive in those internment camps. And knowing Communist Party, there is no other way out other than, I don't know, total extermination. What are they going to do with those millions of Uyghur people? They're going to let them go back to the street, to their cities, to their villages, and then basically give birth of millions of resistant force. I don't think Communist Party is going to do that. So what are they going to do with those Uyghur people? The world, yeah, it took the world by shock, but did it really give the world a shock strong enough for the world to come up with a new China policy? We're yet to observe.
Right. I agree with you on that. The one common question that often comes up through my public speaking discussions, that if there's any regret or revisit within the Chinese leadership about the reaction, for example, the United States government imposed more than 90 punitive sanctions, including going after this paramilitary unit called Xinjiang Construction Production Corp, XPCC. Recent sanction involves 4 solar panel entities. That is huge.
Yes.
That in order to get China's attention, you need to call them out and cause economic cost. So even with that, we're not seeing much change. Instead, they are putting out something, well, we need to work on our narrative. We need to project lovable image of China. Do you think that they will eventually realize that this is creating backlash, isolating PRC, making it costly operation for them?
A very good question. It has certainly already caused some backlash, but let's not forget what the true character or what the true essence of the character of the Chinese Communist Party. They are criminal groups, basically, and then I keep using the word looting. They're bandits, so they have a mentality of a bandit. Mm-hmm. When come to the core is greed.
Right.
They cannot stop their greed. So, there are backlashes. So immediate next question is, can we survive it? Right. They're not like a responsive modern countries to say, oh, this is not what we want. The world is not going to like us for what we're doing. And then we are proud modern nation, so we have to adopt to that. No, that's not how the Chinese Communist Party thinks. They think, okay, we did this, there is a backlash, but can we survive it? You know what? I don't know the answer. Probably they can. Because until the world realize that they're dealing with a bandit regime and then really treat them like that, really speaking the language they understand, really hit them where it hurts.
Right.
Until that happens, their question of can we survive this maybe have a positive answer.
Right. The one of the common question that often comes up, if there will be internal resistance, if there will be any potential allies in China that would speak out against the concentration camps in the Uyghur homeland and the ongoing genocide. Do you see any hope? Is there any reason for hope in China that change might be happening and we might be having a strong Chinese opposition to the ongoing acts of those atrocity crimes?
When you introduced me in the beginning of our session, you said in the last 30-some years, I have never stopped and then think about it. Yeah, it took off more than my entire life, more than half of my life that I have been fighting against Communist Party. And then I can proudly report this, that in the country of China, there has always been resistance. There have always been force for freedom and democracy. Unfortunately, when the world took the wrong side of that resistance, of that confrontation between Chinese democracy forces and Chinese regime, the world helped nurture a much, much stronger totalitarian regime. I would say without hesitation that the Chinese Communist regime is by far the most powerful totalitarian regime this world has seen. Not only just by the size, but also with the modern technology, and then with the world's appeasement policy that has nurtured it. So actually, yes, there are resistance in China, and then we should always bear hope in that. Before, like let's say 5-10 years ago, when I go around the world and talk to the world and media, or when I talk to the world leader, I often say, please don't take the wrong side of this very, very difficult battle that we're fighting. But in the last few years, about the last decade, I have changed my narrative a little. I said, well, with your help, Chinese Communist Party become what it is today, which is a direct threat to the civilization we're living in.
Right.
And then to the civilization we have achieved in the past many decades, past many centuries. And you not only bear a moral responsibility. When I say you, I'm pointing my finger to the world, actually, Western world especially. Not only you bear a responsibility for this, but it's also in your benefit to stand up and defend your way of life, the universal value, and fight against Communist Party. So yes, there are hopes within China, but I, at this time, asking the world, give that hope some support, some nutrition, some tap on the shoulder. Otherwise, you will see a monstrous party easily crushing any butt of the flame that resembles that hope. And then I used to say, don't take the wrong side. And now I'm saying, no, help us fighting the direct threat to the life, to the civilization we're all living in today.
Right. You recently visited Europe, and you've been traveling to European capitals previously, and you encouraging them to be strong on human rights and democracy in China. In recent years, in the last couple of years in particular, it's quite disturbing in light of Europe's history with fascism,
Yes.
Nazism, and communism,
Yes.
they still have not figured out what to say. Some countries have shown tepid, mean-dealing responses,
Yes.
but most of them still don't get it. What would be the why they're not joining the effort led by U.S., for example, to address perhaps one of the worst humanitarian crises in the modern era, namely the Uyghur genocide? Italy, as we speak, is the largest export destination for tainted consumer products made by enslaved Uyghurs.
Yes. It's painful to see that, and it's also painful to see that some countries. I'll give you I'll name Italy, for instance. One time I visited there, I was on a media and then in a panel, and then there's a discussion, and then there are people saying that Italy in Europe or in the economic crisis these days, perhaps we should learn from China using their governance, their success in fighting off the financial tsunami after 2008. When I heard that, I was quite surprised, and then I raised my eyebrows, and I guess the host of the TV talk show realized and said, "You have something to say?" I say, "Well, yes." My response to this gentleman is that you don't really have to learn from China across the globe, from the other side of the globe. You have your own example, which is perfect of a resemblance of what China is doing today. His name is Mussolini. And then I took the video, a recording by a little shock. It's like how Mussolini get into this conversation. Well, basically, what China is doing today is what Mussolini or even Hitler was doing in the 30s. That in the country, within the country, is total fascist ruling and suppressing all dissent. And then when it comes to Uyghur issue, it's even more familiar with own resembling. And economically, they were doing pretty well. Italy, Mussolini, and then with all the government involvement in controlling every factor of the society, they did create also in Third Reich and Japan also created some economic growth.
Right.
So the resemblance is amazing. But I also said in Italy, I say, okay, Italy in the 20th century had two major economic leap forward. The first time was under Mussolini. The second time was under the flag of democracy after World War II, when Italy joined the camp of freedom, of democracy. It had its second economic forward. You're having a reset now, but then basically you are still in that leap forward. Italy becoming one of the world industrial country was because of democracy, was not because of fascism.
Right.
So learn the lesson from that, and then I'm hoping the world, the European countries, and more and more, like this time I visited Paris and then met with senior officials in their administration and the parliament. I think the world is coming around. And I would like to quote Senator Marco Rubio when he gave a speech in a public hearing I organized in the Taiwan parliament for Uyghur genocide. Senator Rubio says, the world is coming around and realizing what an evil state the Chinese communist regime is. It's coming around, but big boat turns slow. Right. We have that saying. And then United States bear some responsibility for the wrong policy the first time right after Tiananmen. I think also bear a stronger policy, being the world leader today, to turn that boat around. So I believe European country will eventually come along. Japan will come along. Korea will come along. India will come along. And then in the very front line, Taiwan is also serving as a beacon for these big boats to turn around.
You mentioned the dictators, Hitler, Mussolini. It reminds me of the 1936 Olympics.
Yes.
When he was planning for the Summer Olympics, he already had camps. Mm-hmm. He was already engaging in forced labor. He was subjecting Jewish women to various types of torture. And when you tell the story, the Uyghur people will respond like, yeah, this is exactly what has happened to
Yeah.
the Uyghurs. So with that background, now we have this Winter Olympics coming up next year. The international community has not made up its mind yet, particularly on the government levels. What should we do with this upcoming? Why would people think that it's okay for a genocidal regime to hold a Olympics?
Well, the answer also is history resembles itself remarkably. And the time when Berlin Olympic did manage to go through is because the world held an appeasement policy to say, okay, maybe we just need to learn. We just need to learn how to deal with a new rising power. That's the same mentality the world is having today. It's not a new rising power. It's a new rising evil power.
Right.
So when you give, if you give this kind of response to a new evil power, the only conclusion they can come to their own is that I can get away with everything. I can do all these things. I can put the camp, Jewish people in the camp and forcing labors and still get the world to agree with me in this Berlin Olympic. And then I can just switch a few words to say the same about Beijing. The world needs to come to a very clear position that we cannot accept. Only maybe then, if the world united in one voice and giving Beijing a big no, maybe only then, with their greediness, they can still come to some senses to say, okay, maybe we play by the rule of the game of the world, we can loot more. Because we can stay in position longer because the world will let us. So that is a remote hope, but still it's much better than the world caving in. The opposite will be Beijing says, don't worry about them. They will raise the question of human rights. They have been doing that in the last 30 years. They have done that before Berlin Olympics, but they never expect us to give them a real answer. They will trade with us anyway. So basically, economic sanction or some talking, some dressing down in the international media means nothing because we're bandits. We are not after glory. We are after money. Right. It's like make them that much different from a petty thieves. Right. So the world really needs to come to see. But the unfortunate is also that comparison. Whenever we compare Chinese regime with Hitler, the world come to this, oh no, you cannot do that kind of a response.
Right.
To say, and it took me by shock actually the first few times when I make the comparison. And then somebody tapped on my shoulder in UK and says, you know what, we have a saying here in UK, whoever mentioned Hitler in a debate loses it. So the world have been traumatized by Hitler that come to a point cannot think of comparing anybody with Hitler. I remember I was talking on a BBC Hard Talk when Stephen Soccer asked me that question. It gave me that long no. No, you cannot compare Xi Jinping with Hitler. I immediately remember, yeah, that's a taboo, especially in Europe, especially in UK. So I changed my narrative and I say, okay, if I don't compare Hitler with Xi Jinping, can I compare United Kingdom today with United Kingdom in 1930s? This is a sensible comparison. You are also facing a rising nation's direct threat. And then at this time, did you learn from your lesson? You know the appeasement policy has the back, story of a United Kingdom, but it is certainly not just a lesson for United Kingdom.
We're so pleased to hear that we have a strong ally in Taiwanese parliament to advance human rights and democracy. I want to congratulate you in the new role that you've been appointed. Can you tell us more about this commission that you are serving as the General Secretary?
Thank you. Yes, I am the General Secretary of the Taiwan Parliamentary Human Rights Commission. Taiwan is in a very difficult, unfair, and unique position. It's in the front row of Chinese threat. So when people, when we have a hearing, we thank you very much for attending our hearing for Uyghur genocide, and then we are also organizing for Hong Kong peoples. A lot of people would say, like, why are you doing this? Why Taiwan is doing this? Where's the common factor between Taiwan and Uyghur? Mm-hmm. Well, the common factor is we have a common enemy. Mm-hmm. So and only Taiwan is a democracy. And particularly for that reason, Taiwan is under much bigger a threat from Chinese Communist Party. And geographic location also make it difficult for us. There are more than 1,000 warheads pointing at Taiwan. So when we Taiwanese say, I wear this different hats, but Taiwanese is one proud hat I love to wear. When we Taiwanese says we are under threat, we mean it quite literally. The threat is military. But still, the democracy in Taiwan is one strong character majority of 23 million Taiwanese people enjoy and extremely proud of. We earned our democracy on our own. We are not like handed down. We're not, drafted our own constitution by American general like Japan. We earned our own democracy. We know how sweet it is to be a citizen of a democracy. We know how sweet freedom tastes, although it sometimes gives us a ring to fight against each other over idea of, exercising our own freedom. But we love it, and then we earned it. We're going to defend it. So whenever when people ask, about Taiwan and the relation between Taiwan and then the Uyghur, Hong Kong, Tibetan people, that's what I told them. We have a common enemy. And then also when I go around the world, I want to tell the world there's another common factor between Taiwan and, say, United States, United Kingdom, Europe, Japan, is our shared value, freedom, human rights, rule of law. And then Taiwan has been an exemplary member of democracies. I often say this, like in Taiwan, we breathe in and out freedom. We know it.
That's powerful.
Yeah, and then I don't think in older democracies, people realize that every day because you have been, almost privileged with it. So, but Taiwanese people breathe in and out freedom, and we know it. Therefore, we'll defend that. And then, therefore, I think Taiwan deserves a seat in the club of democracy, and then we deserve to be treated more fairly by democracies. And then the Taiwan Parliamentary Human Rights Commission, because of its unique position, being a parliamentary body, we have a slightly more access than the administration, than the president of the country. So we can come here easily to, like I met with Madam Speaker, and then also members of the parliament easier. That easiness, a tiny little, is unfair. Our president should be able to be as free as like this, but we know how to use a little freedom to fight for more freedom. Right. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve with this new position.
Thank you. I could talk to you for hours about these issues. But we have to conclude the program. Thank you for taking the time to visit us and have this conversation with me, sharing your valuable insights on these important issues. As always, I enjoy having conversation with you.
Same here.
Despite the grim and almost depressing nature of the topic and issues involved. Congratulations again on your new role.
Thank you very
much. Terrific, and I was so pleased to be part of that hearing that you organized. in the Taiwanese parliament. I hope we can continue this conversation. Please come back to visit us again.
I look forward, and then I appreciate the channel that Hudson Institute provide for our voices, voices of a Chinese dissident to be heard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.